Well, greetings, everybody. Apologies for the 1 minute late start. We had our what have now become typical YouTube streaming issues, but it looks like it's resolved and we are now streaming live to YouTube. So I don't have to apologize, I guess, except for the 1 minute late start, I suppose. So I have a little bit of a preamble tonight. Not much. I'm gonna do this here and before we start our program. So this is the last Art in Focus of the season. It's hard to believe that we started doing these virtual Art in Focus events back in January and we weren't sure about them, but we've now made it through our full spring season and we find ourselves here at the end. It's also incidentally my last Art in Focus. I'm still with South Shore Arts, of course, but starting next fall, Art in Focus will be hosted by our Director of Education, Summer Sheringhausen, who of course hosted the last event and it also put together this year's season. So I want to thank Summer for that and also to wish her luck next year when she's hosting Art in Focus on her own. Other than thanking Community Healthcare for being the sponsor of Art in Focus, as well as thanking Joe Rowan for letting us use his music as the introduction to the events online. I just have one order of business, I think, to share, which is to show everybody the place on our website. I'm going to share my screen again, where you can find out about the Northwest Indiana On-Ramp program that we are the lead partners on. And it's the entrepreneurial course that is geared towards artists who are looking to make their creative practice part of their income, part of their livelihood, or maybe if not part of their livelihood, to sort of step up and make their practice more professional. Maybe that's taking on a larger project or redesigning their website. There's some aspect that's looking to increase their visibility or to make their practice more professional. So if you go to our website right now and you click on that square, you'll find some information about it. We'll be hosting a series of information sessions about the application for that program. And then on that last week, right before it's due, the application's due on the 24th, we'll have sort of an office hours to help, it's due on the 24th, this event's on the 21st. We'll have some office hours to help people if they have any last minute questions. So this program's taking place in August at the Center for Visual and Performing Arts in Munster. I'll be facilitating this program with a local artist named Sam Love and the managing director of the Society of Innovators at Purdue Northwest, Jason Williams. If you have any questions, go to our website, email me or email Sam Love. His email here at the bottom. You can of course find out more information about the program here. So I'm going to stop sharing. I just wanted to point people in that direction rather than just talking about it. At this point, I want to introduce Kerianne Quick. She's a professor at San Diego State University. I've known Kerianne Quick for over 10 years now. We were in graduate school together at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. She was a metalsmith. I was an MFA candidate in visual art practice. We became great friends and have stayed in touch ever since. I was delighted when she agreed to be a guest on Art in Focus. She was supposed to participate actually virtually during last year's program, but in the spring there was a scheduling conflict at the last second and she was unable to join us. So this year she's joining us when all of the events are virtual, and I'm going to ask her to turn on her camera and turn on her microphone. I'm going to put a spotlight on her so that you can see us equally. And there she is, Kerianne Quick.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're welcome, Kerry. Thank you, as I said, for joining us. I know you have a pretty big presentation. you have lots of stuff to share with everybody. I don't want to keep you from getting started too much. I just want to, again, thank you. Carrie is joining us from San Diego, of course. So that's where she is. I think it's important to mention that.
Yes, I am joining you from San Diego. I was sad to not be able to join you last year, and as a result, I'll be talking about a project that I would have talked about last year. It finished in 2019, and I'm going to kind of walk you through what that project was all about, and maybe at the end I'll talk a little bit about what I'm going to be working on since that project. So should I go ahead?
Actually, yes, but I have one more piece of housekeeping. I just want to remind everybody that if you have questions, to pop them either in the Q&A or the chat. I'll be monitoring those. I know we have a few people watching on YouTube. I don't really monitor the YouTube chat. It's kind of a lot for me to do. So if you hear this and you want to ask questions or you think you might, go ahead and hop over to the Zoom platform. Other than that, I will turn it over to you, Carrie.
All right, I'm gonna do some screen sharing here. And all right. So I just want to thank you all for being, well, really wherever you are, but also here with me. And I hope you're all safe and comfortable. And I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the ancestral homelands of the Kumeyaay, otherwise known as the Baja borderlands of San Diego, California. I'm here in San Diego. I'm a professor at San Diego State University, where I teach in the jewelry and metalwork program. I'm trained as a jeweler and a metalsmith, but I use that training to think about how we use objects and how what we keep close to us is sort of a form of communication, of human expression. So as you'll see in my presentation, my practice has strayed pretty far from the conventional materials and forms of jewelry, and is kind of more transmedia, where my jeweler's skill set is applied to almost any material. I'm interested in how we as humans use jewelry and objects and how they play active roles in our lives. In particular, I'm into how jewelry and objects can be used to connect us to one another, and how those connections can be used to build empathetic relationships. So I'm going to show you first, I'm going to start by showing you a really short clip that illustrates the project kind of as a whole. It's sort of a nice summary of the project. And then I'll go back in time and tell you how I became interested in this topic and how I developed the project.
What objects give meaning to our lives? KPBS reporter Maya Trabulsi talked to an artist who gathered things special to San Diego residents and preserved them as 3D laser art. It's part of our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
When you walk into the New Americans Museum, you may wonder where the art exhibit is. But if you look closer, you'll see a penknife, a bell, a figurine. And if you look even closer, you will learn about the stories embedded in these objects.
Each one of these individual stories come together as a chorus, in my view.
Kerianne Quick is the artist in residence here.
When you start with something specific, something completely surprising can unfold, something you never would have access to otherwise.
Something specific like a typewriter.
Like a typewriter, yes, yes.
For her exhibit, called A Portrait of People in Motion, she spent over a year gathering treasured objects from San Diego residents. But more importantly, she gathered the stories that accompany them.
If we can feel some of that emotion about what it's like to try to figure out how to live in a new place, then maybe we can empathize with those who are experiencing the most extreme version of that discomfort.
The item is scanned and then 3D printed or laser engraved to leave behind what Kerianne calls a ghost. Transparent with faint detail, yet still teeming with the story of how it came to San Diego.
The story is the art piece. The objects that are represented here, they're just a way in to those stories. And yes, the objects are transparent. And that's on purpose.
Some objects are made of clear resin, others are acrylic.
The light, as it projects through the laser engraved surface, it creates a shadow where the writing almost becomes legible.
At first glance, they're hard to see against the stark white wooden furniture, designed to look like furniture in a home. But looking closer is exactly what Kerianne wants you to do.
And when they look closer and they wonder what the thing is that they're looking at, they're given access to the story that is behind it.
Kerianne also recorded the oral histories of each piece that can be played by dialing a number on your phone.
Welcome to a portrait of people in motion.
And then the corresponding number of the item.
My object is a jacket that when I was in Korea during the Korean War, this was a jacket that I in effect stole from the Army.
From 1971 to now, and we've lived many places, and the recipes have gone with me.
My object is a little tiny Inuit figure that was given to me in 1945 by my first boyfriend, who was stationed in the Aleutians.
And I think just seeing it makes me feel at home because I grew up seeing it.
The crux of what I'm trying to do here is to help people in general, feel something that might make them treat their neighbor a little bit better.
And as the sound of plane engines roar above this little museum under the San Diego flight path, it offers a subtle reminder that we are all people in motion. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Maya Trabulsi in San Diego.
What object?
So that just kind of gives you a quick overview. So artist talk over. Bye. Just kidding. So I want to go back and talk about why I'm interested in this topic. And it really starts with these questions. Not only do I want to ask these questions about the making of jewelry and objects, but about the wearing and the use of jewelry and objects. Like when and where and how do we use them? What do they contain or what do they communicate when we do use them? Who or where do they connect us to? And how does context shift the meaning or the value of the things that we use? So I trace this general interest back to a kind of childhood obsession that I had with genealogy. But what I now call as an adult and as a craftsperson, I call it object-oriented ancestry. So I sort of discovered as a little kid that objects can connect us to histories that are hidden. My grandmother's house was sort of this repository for photographs and trinkets that belonged to my great and great great grandparents. And I was fascinated by these objects and how they helped my grandmother tell stories about my family. The objects basically substantiated her claims about where my ancestors, my relatives came from, where they lived, what their lives were like, and where they traveled. And as I grew up, some of the objects sort of started to yield secrets, like a divorce or wealth gained and then lost. And through this kind of real soap opera, I learned that objects could connect me and bring me closer to people that I knew and also people that I didn't and would never know, while also helping me kind of understand myself in the process. So for me, those objects made that connection to my family tangible and powerful and more real than it would have otherwise been. So with that in mind, I'll show you a quick overview of a few other bodies of work, just really fast, that are sort of related to this thinking, which I think is important to understand. So as a craftsperson, an artist and scholar, I'm interested in a way of thinking called object-oriented ontology, which means to look at the nature of our existence through a lens that includes objects and how they affect our way of being. So it's kind of like imagining that objects have a life and have agency, and that the origin of those objects or the physical context of those objects plays a role in how we perceive them. So I like to give you an example. We can see this in a basic valuation of material goods. For example, we perceive marble from Italy in one way, and we perceive marble from Alabama in another way. So to sort of apply these ideas to my work, many years back, I started, actually when I met Micah initially, I started collecting materials from specific places to express the idea that place and experience is transportable and that value can be embedded by expressing the experience or the origin of the thing. So I used materials to tell stories that intended to enhance the way a viewer thinks or feels about an object. Something that I call material specificity. So what you see on the screen is from a body of work titled North Ronaldsay, where I used fleece from a remote island in Scotland to document a farming practice unique to that island. So that's me on the right, clipping sheep with crofters Billy and Marion Muir during their annual clipping week that called the Pund. And so I brought back a quantity of this fleece that I had clipped myself. And I constructed these big brooches where I was trying to make a sort of hybrid portrait of the humans and the animals that live on the island and kind of think about my experience. And so this piece was had an embedded MP3 player that plays sounds recorded on the island of Arctic tern nesting grounds. So hopefully you'll be able to hear this. So this sort of, for me, it demonstrated the notion that an object can become a container for memory, and that memory, or my memory of being in a place, could be somehow transmitted to the viewer or the wearer through texture and sound. And just a couple other examples. So, I really started traveling to gather my own material, and I got into the idea of creating an authentic souvenir, unlike the sort of plastic tat that you find in a souvenir shop. These are made from materials that I gathered on a road trip from Chicago to LA. So what you see here is a Great Salt Lake souvenir spoon made with oolitic sandstone from the shore of the Great Salt Lake, a Grand Canyon keychain with sandstone from the Grand Canyon, and a Redwoods bottle opener with redwood bark. All the silver parts I fabricated by melting down crappy silver jewelry that I bought in gift shops along the route. And for me, this like grouping embodies this sort of like fragmented experience, roadside stops, glimpses of the landscape, but takes on the form of what we traditionally think of as souvenir. And then lastly, this work began with a curiosity about the Mid-Hudson Valley's post-industrial landscape. So I was living in the Mid-Hudson Valley in New York for about 3 years. And I was really interested in these things I saw around me: crumbling chimneys, rusty silos, and these beaches that were covered in the industrial waste from factories that produced the materials that built New York City, primarily cement and brick. So these materials, particularly brick, became a way for me to explore the region's native, colonial, and industrial histories. So I made a really big body of work using this material, and I'm only going to show you one piece from it. This was the first piece that I made in the series. It's a brick that I foraged out of the river, and then I carved a pocket into, and I embedded an MP3 player that plays a 6-channel recording of bricks being made. So the sounds are completely layered on top of one another. They're not distinguishable, and there's no order. It's not like step by step, here's how you make a brick. It's like, I think about it as a composition, not as a composition, but like an audio portrait of what the made thing would sound like if you could listen to its history. Let's see if I can play the sound for you. I don't know if it'll play. Oh, sorry, I have no sound. Just imagine like shoveling sounds and kilns being fired and clay being slapped into molds. So that's what you hear when you put on those headphones. So I used this strategy to make several bodies of work where I would gather material from a place and make work that expressed some history or story about that place. So I made a body of work using sugar from Hawaii, and another with leather from Mexico, and another using copper from Michigan, where I felt like the material's terroir, like to borrow a winemaking term, the material contained or could communicate something about place that wouldn't otherwise be present without that material. And those bodies of work were all centered around my physical location. So it was all about me being there and trying to discover something about where I was. So I spent considerable time in those places and would search for a native material to help me discover and storytell about that place. So it's really just a strategy of my practice, just approaching material as a foundation, as a way to give me direction for making research and then eventually making formal decisions. So in the summer of 2015, I relocated to San Diego, and this was just after the height of the Northern Triangle refugee crisis, which of course is not over. When at that moment, tens of thousands of women and unaccompanied children from Central America were journeying to our southern border seeking refuge. And I was completely disturbed by what was happening and was moved to try to do anything. So I started working with Catholic Charities here in San Diego in the occultation program, and with Border Angels going on water drops in the desert. And I was trained as a legal observer to work in the camps on the Tijuana side of the border. That was right before COVID, so I never actually got to go do that. But it really opened my eyes to what was happening on the border in a really deep way. And of course, our border is not the only border where this is happening. It's happening all over the world. And so, I was really thinking a lot about displacement and what it meant to seek refuge. So since 2015, up until 2018-19, I spent those years learning about the history of the region. And I learned that San Diego has the second largest urban population of resettled people in the United States. And that since the 1970s, San Diego has been a refuge to people fleeing war, political or religious persecution, and displacement caused by natural disasters. So the more I learned, the more I started to shift my ideas of what is migration. I asked myself, what is migration and who are migrants? And I realized that myself included, we as a culture tend to be somewhat myopic in the way that we think about migration. Migrants are other people, and migration is something that happens to and is experienced by someone else. And what I also realized is that with few exceptions, we have all moved. Some of us have moved across the world. Some of us have moved across town. And those of us with privilege simply call it something different. We call it moving. Right? We don't call it migrating when you get a new apartment. But in reality, that is what it is. And to migrate is really to be human. And we're all sort of migrating. So I started exploring my own family history and really starting to shift my thinking. And so this is my grandmother at age 19. This photo was taken in Havana, where she was born. I started interviewing my relatives, and really coming to terms with the fact that people I am related to and or close with were granted entry into this country as they fled the conditions at another. And that those waiting at our border now are not that different than my family was. Members of my family were just fortunate enough to have the means to escape, but many don't, and many still don't. So this is my great aunt, Elvie, on the right, seen with my uncle Pedro and my aunt Mickey. So they fled the Cuban Revolution seeking asylum in the United States. They came, actually the two younger ones came on a student visa, which they later overstayed and then applied for protection. My cousin, Maritza, who was in her 20s when she escaped, explained that when traveling from Cuba, you were only allowed to have with you a gold wedding band, a very simple watch, and $20 in currency. Anything more would be confiscated by the Cuban authorities at the port, making it more difficult to immigrate. So there are lots of stories in my family that my great aunts and my cousins sewed important heirlooms into their clothes and swallowed family jewelry, enabling them to bring it to their new life. And of course, many things were left behind as well, rumored to be plastered into the walls of the family home or buried in the backyard in Havana. So whether my family members knew it or not, the things they brought with them were a way to maybe plan for an uncertain future, or to stay connected to their past. And the memory is really fuzzy on what happened to most of what they brought. Some of it was sold, but a lot of it languished in drawers, thought of as junk. And some of that junk would one day become the starting point for storytelling. Questions that I would ask and answers that I would demand. And so these objects really became these tiny pathways to knowing and understanding my family's history. So I inherited some of those things, which sometimes I wear, like this necklace on the right. I often wear it. It would belong to my grandmother. And I wear it when I need to channel my grandmother, who was sort of force of nature. Incidentally, my grandmother also smuggled a peanut butter jar of dirt out of Cuba. And when my sister and I were growing up, she would take us into the basement and show us the jar, giving us instructions to pour it into her grave when she died, which we did. But this is just a little tiny thimbleful that I kept. So at the same time I was learning about my family history, as a scholar, I was looking at portable wealth, specifically the historical use of jewelry as a transporter of wealth, culture, and memory. So this is a collapsible crown from the 1st century AD, unearthed at Tilla Tepe in Afghanistan. A princess traveling on the Silk Road could have it disassembled and in her saddlebags in under 3 minutes, presumably to ride on and reassemble it and wear it when a crown would be more appropriate. It was designed not to be worn during travel, but to be stored and easily carried. So it's something that is worn intimately on the body and also carried close to it. And of course, jewelry has long been a practical way to protect and carry what is most valuable. And we still do this today, of course. Here's a kind of an interesting contemporary example. So in the US, feeding off of sort of our distrust of our government and each other, these websites suggest that you wear your wealth, as immigrants of some material means have done for thousands of years. These websites sell investment grade jewelry that is weighed in easy to count troy ounce increments, which means that at any given moment, a wearer can determine the value of a piece by checking the gold market. These sites remind the reader that gold and diamonds are an international form of currency and that they are easily transportable should you need to. So at the very bottom, it says, it's the kind of wealth that will last for generations and comes with the built-in advantage of easy transportation. But of course, jewelry is not the only thing that we carry when we move. And there are different forms of value assigned to the objects we consider precious. Value is relative. So we as humans have used material that hold no exchange value, but are perhaps even more important because they cannot be meaningfully replaced or substituted. So here's a few other examples from the jewelry world, which is my world. On the left, an early Victorian mourning brooch. The Victorians, of course, are well known for their mourning rituals, which included incorporating the hair of a loved one into their jewelry and home decor to remember the dearly departed. And on the right, a ring by a contemporary jeweler named Warwick Freeman. His earth ring allows you to unscrew the threaded ball and sort of punch the earth and to take a kind of core sample, so to speak, so that you can carry a place you hold dear everywhere you go, which in effect is not totally unlike my grandmother's peanut butter jar of dirt, only more elegant and more transportable. Sometimes an object might not carry or be made of specific material, but represent the absence of it. So this is a work that I was making during the time that I was learning about all of these things. It's an in-progress piece where the keys to every place I've lived since I was 11 years old are represented through an impression of that key in silver. Each time I move, I take a new impression of the key and fabricate a fob with that impression and add it to the ring. And I kind of think about it as like a sort of master latch kid key set that connects me to these sort of ghosts of places that I once knew well and occupied, but will likely never return to. And I will continue to add to it, presumably until the last place I live. And while, of course, my own experience does not compare to the experience of someone who's been displaced by war or other, serious consequences, persecution or disaster, by relating to my own experience, I have an emotive response. I feel something for my family who experienced this. I feel something for those waiting at the border. I feel for those who risk everything to feel safe, live better, make sacrifices. So this is from a Washington Post article titled, "America is more diverse than ever, but still segregated." Data was collated from the US Census and the American Community Survey. And the point of me showing you this is that while I personally live in an incredibly diverse city, my neighbors tend to look more like me than not. And this is true across the nation, according to the Washington Post. In 2016 and the years that followed, it became very clear to me that there is a need to build understanding and empathy amongst strangers. So how might I, as an artist, create opportunities to build understanding and empathy? It seems like a kind of a heavy lift. But I was inspired by other artists and photojournalists who had provoked my own emotional response to try to do the same. And I'd like to share a little of some of their work with you as it directly inspired my project. So this image and the following black and white images are from photojournalist Brian Sokol's project, The Most Important Thing. At the extremes of the migrant crises, the wealthy bring liquid assets that pay their way across borders, but the poor have only few treasured objects that help them survive. And so Brian Sokol went into the refugee camps all over Europe and photographed people with their most important thing. The image you see on the bottom is by Tom Kiefer from his project El Sueño Americano. Kiefer worked in a USCIS detention facility at the Arizona border as a janitor, and he would gather the things that had been confiscated from migrants, sort them by type, and then photograph them. So these two image makers really inspired me. In addition, Brian Sokol's project inspired a poet to write a poem, and I'd like to read a small portion of it. The poet is called Jennifer Toksvig, and her poem is called What They Took With Them, a List. I'm just going to read a small part of it. Sacred soil, sacred book, sacred text, rosary and prayer beads, rosary, prayer beads, rosary. My headdress hides the key to a small metal chest containing all the essentials for a wedding. Ring, ring, charm, ring. Mother's wedding ring. I lost mine in the bombing, so my mother gave me hers. My earrings, I make jewelry. All the jewelry of my people. It symbolizes freedom. No one tells me what to wear. Heart necklace, Virgin Mary necklace, bracelet, bracelet, bracelet. No, the bracelet's not my favorite thing. That's Nancy. She's my doll. The night we fled, she was left behind. I don't mind. She'll keep watch. The photographic work of Sokol, Kiefer, and the traveling exhibition, What We Carried, which is what you see on the screen now, reveal that on what is anticipated to be a shorter, easier journey, people bring things of symbolic value, like photographs, musical instruments, and jewelry. Or keys to a house that one may never return to or may no longer exist. While others, who know they will travel great distances, generally have more practical foresight, bringing tools, money, weapons, jerry cans full of water, etc. So as the 2018-2019 artist in residence at the New Americans Museum, I wanted to look at San Diego through the lens of the objects brought here to San Diego by those who have come to be resettled here in recent years, but also by everyone else, giving us equal footing in our status as migrants, a migrant being anyone who moves. A significant part of San Diego's current population is made up of domestic migrants, including myself, who come from other states to report for military service or a job in biotech or aerospace, or to attend one of 3 major universities, or perhaps to retire in beautiful weather. And of course, there are those who were born here, but whose parents or grandparents came for one of the many reasons people do: a new life, opportunity, safety. In waves since the mid-19th century, of course, you all probably know that millions of people have migrated to Southern California, and our movement here has also meant the movement, displacement, and even elimination of those who were here before. And if we dwell on that, even for a moment, if we stop thinking about migration as something that only happens to people we see on the news and only across international borders, if we think about it as something that happens across the country, across state lines, from city to city, and that it is also something that has an effect, which may be benign or profound. And then if we think of what it's like to be a stranger, to start a new school or a new job in a strange place, to feel ill at ease, to have to learn where things are and how things operate, then we can perhaps for a moment empathize with others who are experiencing the most profound version of the shift from known to unknown. So my project, A Portrait of People in Motion, asks, as a city of migrants, who are we? What did we bring with us? What does that say about our values, shared and otherwise? Can our objects paint a portrait of this experience we share, albeit under radically different circumstances? And can it draw us closer? How can sharing build understanding and empathy? So over the course of a year, I facilitated events both inside and outside of the New Americans Museum, where I digitally collected more than 120 migration stories and the objects related to them. So this is an installation view of the gallery. So these are some of the objects participants brought in to contribute to the project. And I'll explain a little bit about the process now. So a participant would come in and I would record their oral history. Some were in front of an audience and some were private in the museum space. And usually they were about 15-minute interviews that I would later compress into a 1 to 3 minute clip. Their object would be photographed in a portable studio setup. And then the object would be 3D scanned using a laser-enabled 3D scanner. So what you see on the right is the studio image of the bell, and what you see on the left is the studio image, and what you see on the right is the 3D scan image. And here's just another example, a doll from Greece and its scan. So the scanning technology is purposefully set to not be able to pick up every detail of the work. The scans are not in color, they're incomplete, and they're vague. And from there, I produced a digital mesh file that can be manipulated and prepared for 3D printing. So here's a video of the printer in action. So there's this vat of liquid that the laser solidifies in tiny layers according to the shape of the digital model. And everything was printed in clear resin. So then the print is washed in 99% isopropyl alcohol and then cured in an ultraviolet oven. and then assembled. And so what you see here, it's not an exact replica of the bell. It's actually only a quarter of the bell. And I did that on purpose. None of the objects were fully complete. I mean, they were all made in this sort of like clear material, but everything was sort of a fragment of the original. For the more two-dimensional objects, it didn't make sense to 3D print. So they were laser engraved and cut. So here's just a short clip of the laser in action. It could be a very slow process. And here is that object that you just saw being cut, finished, laying in the cutting bed of the laser. It's a 30 by 36 inch painting by a well-known Indonesian painter, brought to the US by the parents of the participant when they migrated. So to organize the object documentation events and the exhibition, I divided the objects into categories: objects carried, objects remembered, objects of history, and future objects. And this was a useful way to help participants think of what they might have to contribute to the project. The category objects carried are objects that belong to and were carried here by someone who immigrated. These are firsthand stories that are kind of embedded in the physical. I'd like to play you a clip. I'm going to play you one clip from each category. So this is from objects carried.
It's a wooden handmade cross made by my dad, probably in 1987. It's a little, I would say, replica based on the decoration done on church from the 12th century that I grew up by, situated in Monastery Studenica. It's protected by UNESCO. It's one of the biggest world achievements with frescoes inside and made in Roman style. It's really beautiful. So that was something that was very nice to grab by. Very quiet, bunch of monks, and a little ambulance where my dad worked and also did all this wood carving. We have a lot of little things that he made, and big things. So my dad was always inspired. Wood carving, that was his hobby. First, I felt very important, so that's that kind of childish attachment to it. He made it for me, and now he's not alive anymore, so this is even more important. Even the time of his death, I was here. It was prevented from going, so I couldn't even be there with him. So this is something that I know that he made with his hands. So I'm very attached to it. That's probably one of the most important objects I carry now. You know, it's just valuable to me. I know what it is. From him to me.
Sometimes we cannot take what we want when we leave. It may not seem important at the time. It may be impossible to transport or even intangible, like a scent or a feeling. It might be the place itself or a person in that place. Objects remembered documents the stories of the things left behind. So participants brought in photographs or just a description or a stand-in object to tell the story connected to an object that they remembered.
My object is actually my brother, who was left behind when we escaped Laos. My family, we stayed a little bit after the war, but it became apparent that we could not remain safely. But the family was worried that we wouldn't make our escape across. So they left behind my brother to keep the family line going. Sorry. We did escape safely to Thailand, and we were there for a year and a half before we successfully filed for political asylum and made it to the States. We applied 8 times while we were in the States, and the communist government always found a reason to deny his visa to visit the U.S., probably knowing that he would never return. In 2008, during the final application, and it seemed like it was going to be successful because you have to bribe them to even look at the visas and things, he got into a car accident and passed away. My parents didn't really like to talk about our history and the escape. There's a piece that I wrote when I was 12 years old It's called Strangers. I'm his sister and he's my brother, but we are strangers to each other. What, how, why is it so? It all started some 10 years ago. The communists were going to take our father's life. So he left most of his family, taking only kids and wife. In all the commotion, Grandma grabbed the son. She said, "You might all die, so I'm keeping one." After a few essentials were packed, we began on our long, arduous trek. For many days we hid and ran. Then we crossed the Mekong over to Thailand. In 1979, our mother gave birth to a new son. She named the little rascal Hudson. 4 months later, we came here without any clothes or money to spare. Since then, we've come a long way. And I know I should be grateful and gay, but I don't even remember his face, and I may never go back to that place. So I'm his sister, and he is my brother, yet we are still strangers to each other. This is my first actual real poem, and it was very personal, so I still keep this with me. You know, be used every now and then as a reminder about how lucky we are to be here and to take advantage of all the opportunities to us just to honor our parents' decision to leave and also to honor my brother who didn't get that opportunity.
Many of the stories were told second or even third hand. These are the recollections of parents or their parents, of where they came from and what it took to get here passed down. Objects of History documents objects carried on a migration journey by a relative and the stories of the ancestors who experienced that journey.
It is a peddler's bell, and it's one of the oldest things in my family. My great-grandfather used to ring in the streets to get people to come out and buy whatever he was selling. It's a pretty foreign concept to us because, like, at this point, 2 generations in, we were firmly ensconced in middle-class life, so it was just kind of weird to think of our family member being a peddler and pushing whatever they could on the street. So I kind of like that connection to the American dream of it all. He, I guess, came from Hungary. My great-grandmother had a stroke, and this was during the Depression. So her oldest daughter took care of my grandma and, like, all the younger kids. The father left, so the guy who rang the bell skipped town. So this was all we had to, like, signify his existence. Or at least that's how the story was told to me, because everybody who would know the real deal is not here anymore. So I was, like, kind of surprised, like, why would we hold on to this bell of this person who neglected their family? It's continually, like, been packed up and moved along wherever the families moved, because it went to my great aunt, who was the one that took care of everybody, and then to my grandma, who was, like, considerably younger, and then to my mom, who was the only person that was interested in keeping stories like this. As we were growing up, it was just kind of like this weird thing in the house that we just ring to bother each other with. Like, if you wanted to watch a certain TV show and your brother wasn't letting you, you just ring the bell until he couldn't hear it and gave up. Or, like, you would ring it to wake somebody up out of, like, a deep sleep. Everybody still wants the bell. Like, me and my brother and sister were pretty far away from our parents' home, and I have it now, but it's because of, like, the history we gave it, too. This annoying bell. It's not, like, particularly special, but it just has that backstory to it.
That annoying bell. Some participants had not experienced a migration journey firsthand or didn't know their family story, but were able to put themselves mentally in that space by considering the question, what if you had to leave your home today? What would you take on your way out the door? Sometimes what we take is calculated. We've thought about it beforehand. It's important or practical or even for sentimental reasons. And sometimes what we take becomes important later as a witness to the event or journey.
If your house was burning down, what would you grab? And I actually know how I would respond because I survived a house fire. So I can tell you the things I brought are the things I would grab. I brought in a necklace that my mother bought from my grandma's estate for me when she died. I've worn it on and off almost every day of my life for about the last 10 years. Coupled with that, I have my late father's wedding ring that was also my wedding ring that I wear on it, along with a pin from the music club at Boston College that my grandfather was a part of until he graduated in '51. It's a big part of my past. They were three of the biggest influences on me. And then the fact that my mom, who she wasn't around when I was a kid, but the fact that she kind of helped orchestrate the thing that I keep it all together just kind of makes it all that much more special to me. You know, I didn't have any question as to what to bring today. Yeah, the things I brought, they have great emotional, I guess I would say, importance to me. You know, they're very sentimental, but they're also things that like I wear constantly as you know, as a reminder of, you know, not only where I've been but where I'm going. You know, when you lose somebody, remembering the good along with the bad, just it makes you know it was real.
So just a few shots of the installation, which was designed to resemble a generic domestic space. Each object in the space had a number. And as viewers walked around, they could listen to the story of each object by accessing the audio guide through their cell phone. I really wanted the exhibition to feel both full, well, be actually full of the objects, but feel empty and open at the same time. And I really do think of the objects as fragments or shadows of the original objects. Just like our memories, they're fuzzy and faded, maybe a little better or a little worse than the reality. And by excluding the details of the objects, the color, the tactile quality, the weight, the smell, hopefully a moment of uncertainty happens in the viewer. And in that ambiguity, I hope that the viewer will be made curious or think that they recognize something, maybe of their own. And then when they listen to the story related to the object, or perhaps they'll still see some part of their own experience or be able to relate with one that is distant to their own. I'm hoping that the viewer will feel attracted by curiosity or a vague familiarity and then feel something, right? To be able to connect more deeply to something and perhaps someone's story. So what I confirmed through this project for myself is that it is a human impulse to move and to use objects as containers, reminders, connectors. They're sort of this ballast to our life. They provide context, they comfort us, they connect us, they reconnect us, not only to our own experiences, but to a shared experience of human movement. And by hearing each other's stories of migration, hopefully we can understand a little more about each other, see a bit of ourselves in others, and recognize that our differences are relatively small, while we're actually pretty similar overall. So I thank you very much for listening, and I gave Micah a link to my website where you can download a PDF version of the catalog that I made for the exhibition that has all the photographs. And there's also a phone number that you can call that corresponds with the PDF. So you can listen to stories of the objects that are in the exhibition, which will go on view. A portion of it will go on view in June at the San Diego Airport in Terminal 2 as part of the Make Yourself at Home exhibition, which will be up for a year. So if you're traveling through San Diego, you might see some of them. And that's it. Thank you very much.
I'm adding my spotlight so that it doesn't keep flipping back and forth between us on the YouTube feed. So Carrie, first I just want to say to everybody, I did drop that in the chat, Carrie's website. And I was going to scroll down to it real quick. I won't read the whole web address, but it is Kerianne-quick.com for people on YouTube if they want to go try to track down the PDF of the catalog. I'm kind of reeling here because I have I'm really familiar with your work. I've read a lot of your grant applications, your catalog. We spent a lot of time together up until the time I left Vermont and you left upstate New York. So we would maybe talk a little bit more about work. And so this body of work I knew about, but I didn't really ever kind of see it in its totality. I get like pictures of the installation. So this is all to say that I don't even have a question right now. I'm going to read another question that came in the Q&A and see if I can kind of come up with something more cogent. Somebody wants to know how you so you talked a lot about like building empathy and connections with people who are viewing the work, but this was obviously a piece that you interacted with. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the connections that you made with the people and the objects?
Oh, it was so amazing. I mean, I never really anticipated how open. So the news clip kind of alluded to this, but I don't think it really spells it out. Like by really using objects as a foil and inviting someone that you've never met to tell you something that normally would maybe be more private or something that you wouldn't normally tell a stranger, like you're like a deep family secret or your family history or something that's really emotional. I was just so surprised at how open people were. And I think that using the object as a starting point really helped people feel able to do that. And in fact, not only did I have this like incredible experience with strangers, but also with people that I have known for 20 years, participated in the project. And I had never heard the story. Like it just never came up. And it's just doesn't come up in casual conversation. And so it really was impactful to be trusted in that way. But I also, as a sort of a scholar, or maybe, just thinking about how people are able to, as a strategy for communication, by asking someone to tell you about a thing rather than themselves, was a very powerful tool for gathering information.
When I look at the work, I think a lot about the work that you showed before and how you were very rooted in or your work was very rooted in the place you were and something very specific, like a specific materiality of like brick, for example, I'm wearing and you're wearing. And I look at this and it's not about a material object. It's not about how it relates to the body, right? Because it's about things being carried. Sometimes very intimately with the body, and I know that you have a background with like technology and 3D printing and laser cutting and rendering, but it seems like such a stark departure from so much of your other work. And I didn't know if obviously, it's obvious, I'm saying the obvious to you, but did you want to mention that departure, or why did you choose a material that was sort of that it was just going to be the same for everything rather than focusing on the specificity of the material?
The people are the material. It's people. I mean, really, when I got here, I was like, what's my material going to be? And I was like, I was struggling, honestly. But at the same time, I was really aware of this other thing that was happening here. Right. And at the same time, I couldn't find my material grounding like I had in so many other bodies of work and places. I was like, oh, wait, this is the material. The material is the people, the thing that's happening is the material. And I also sort of feel like this exhibition isn't really my work. I mean, it is my work. I for sure, it was a lot of work. It was so much work. It's unbelievable, but I feel like it's actually a research project. And I think I call it a project a lot. And I feel like it's a project. It's like me researching this place and trying to understand this place. And it actually, in my view, the 3D prints, it's not about the 3D prints, right? The 3D prints were just like a way, like, to give the viewer something to look at and something to be curious about, to like hear this thing that I had, these oral histories that I had collected. And I can't even, like, I'm still figuring that part out. Like, I'm actually using some of the 3D, files now to make tooling to make something else, which I think might actually be the work, the artwork.
Right.
So basically I spent like 4 years researching and I had this event, this exhibition where I was trying to like bring people to understand other people.
So I know that we're at 8 o'clock, but we have one question. I kind of want to like meld it into another question to kind of, I don't know, it probably won't bring things to a close, but so you say the work is the people. I'm also going to poke a little because like we have that relationship. I feel like I can. So
right.
Like the work is the people, and like the material was like a thing to look at or the hook, right? It was the thing to lure people in maybe and get them to stand longer. But then like Summer asked, like, why did you choose to 3D print a portion of the object only? And I think I can come up with some answers. They're not going to be as good as yours. But then the thing I want to poke at is like, that's a decision, right? Like to fragment something. And so I wonder if you've thought more about like that decision to fragment something and make it more about the object. To me, I don't want to lead you. To me, that's what it does. It makes it more about the object that you're looking at if you're making a conscious choice to alter it. So why did you choose to 3D print only portions of the object? And like, have you thought about that choice since, would be my part of the question.
Well, I decided to fragment things. I mean, some of it was practical, like some of them were too big to print fully. I mean, I did it. I printed like knife blocks and like, other things that were big, and I assembled them. But I also realized that by recreating something, that the recreation was too specific in and of itself, and that decision to make a replica could actually prevent someone from entering. Like if it becomes too specific, then it could never be their bell. It's always going to be someone else's bell, or someone else's knife block, or someone else's wallet, right? So like making them only partial or vague or, without color, it was all to kind of try to leave it abstract enough to give someone the idea of what the thing might be, but not the whole picture of the thing, because then that thing belongs to someone else.
I can go with that for now.
Okay.
So that's my very last question, I promise. I mean, and most people haven't dropped off, so I'm just gonna ask it anyway. So I know I've seen studio pics of you doing the tooling for a bell. We're gonna focus on the bell. So, and you kind of said like, okay, now I'm making like the art, I'm making the piece. But then like, why? Like, why even do that? Like, why do you need to make the bell out of another material again?
Well, I'm not actually making the bell. I'm making things to carry things that are specific.
Okay.
So the work that I'm working on now is more about the act of carrying than it is about what's being carried. So like, I'm trying to think about, why, not only how these like really hyper specific objects become special, but how we continue to be stewards of them. And even if it's not in reality that we coddle them and that we, wrap them in cotton wool, but that we go to an effort for them. Even if the effort is offhand, we still go to the effort. Like with the bell, like with Gwen Pogregan's clip, she kind of talked about like, it just got moved from house to house, like always came with. There's no real reason that it came with, it just came with because it needed to, so I'm sort of interested in that. So I'm kind of trying to think about like the care of carrying. So I'm not trying to remake the bell. I'm trying to make a case or a carrier for the bell.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we can't talk about that then, because that's work you're working on. That's not fair. I can't poke you. I can't poke about that.
TBD.
Okay. Well, so everybody knows, like, I clearly carry Carrie's work with me, and some people who are watching, I know my stance on things. I'm a little less sort of magnanimous towards them, but Kerry and I talk a lot about relationships to things and objects. But I have my brick. And my giant head's been covering it up, but there's some North Ronald Say wool behind me as well, right there, with some crofters. You can't see it, but the portraits of crofters stitched into the wool. And I have either the or one of the MP3 playing brooches, up in my closet.
Yep,
So,
you got one of them.
So I carry Carrie's objects, but that's a conversation for another time. Kerianne, we've reached the end of our time. I appreciate everybody who watched. I think I want to remind everyone that you can, of course, view these Art in Focus, this one, as well as all the previous ones on our YouTube channel. It's been really great to see that people keep watching them or sharing them, and that it's been something that South Shore Arts hasn't done in the past. And it's been really nice to see that this content that we generate through these great conversations, it kind of can live on, or people can experience. Kerianne can share it if she wants. I don't know if she will, but she can. And I really have liked this format. I miss seeing people, and it's kind of odd for me. I see some of our regulars in the attendee list throughout today. It's kind of odd for me to have my last Art in Focus and not see the people that I've seen for 3 years. So I thank you for hanging in there. I know you're watching sometimes on Monday morning when we would normally meet. And I'll undoubtedly see you at the center, but it's been a lot of fun doing Art in Focus. And I can't think of a better way to close out my 3 years of doing Art in Focus than with one of my nearest and dearest and closest friends. So Kerianne, thank you. And thank you to everybody. And there's no more until September.
Thanks for having me, Micah. It's
You're
fun.
welcome. Cheers.